something that I really live by, and that's think it, do it. Because what I realized is that things that I thought about doing and I wanted to do, but I never did because I said, I've got all the time in the world. I'm 25 years old. Those are the things that I regretted. So now if I think it, I try to do it.
David, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is so great to have you here. You know, I got familiar with you. I remember this vividly. I was glancing through the New York Times and there was a before and after photo. And the before photo was, if I were to describe the photo, a young, thriving college athlete who had the physique almost of like a professional athlete. In a photo, it looked like you were doing like an NFL combine. It turned out you played football at Georgetown. So like there's this photo of this like physical specimen on the left. And then on the right, there's a photo of the same person, but the person is bald, extraordinarily thin, and had the stomach of, you know, a picture you'd see from someone from a third world country who's suffering from malnourishment and about to die. And it was the same person. And it was with a short time frame. I said, holy cow, what? I read the whole profile on you. And then when you reached out, I was like, oh my God, we have to talk to this guy. So let's start. And today you're healthy and thriving. And let's start. Walk us through your story.
Sure. So you're exactly right. It's crazy to look at those pictures. And honestly, it's more surprising for me now as I sit here that I'm on the healthy side of things and I look more, I don't actually really look like I did way back.
You look great. He looks great, guys. For you guys listening, he looks great, healthy, thriving.
So yeah, if I go back to as a medical student, I guess I'll go back to Georgetown. So I played college football at Georgetown, was a quarterback, and never had any medical issues at all. Went to medical school at UPenn with the idea I wanted to become a cancer doctor in memory of my mom. She passed away while I was in college, and that really motivated me to want to treat patients in her memory. And there I was, a third-year med student, kind of fulfilling my dream, training to become this oncologist. And out of nowhere, I started noticing I was more tired than usual. I noticed lumps in my neck. I noticed fluid accumulating in my legs. And I was just so exhausted. I mean, I was so tired that I would go from seeing a patient to finding an empty hospital room and going and taking a nap on the hospital bed for 7 minutes. I would set my alarm for 7 minutes. I'd wake up and go see the next patient, take another nap for 7 minutes. It was hard to describe, and it was just out of nowhere. And I ended up taking a medical school exam and then going down the hall to the emergency department and saying, I've got this awful fatigue. I feel terrible. And they ran blood work and they said, David, your liver, your kidneys, and your bone marrow are shutting down. We have to hospitalize you right away. And it was just so terrifying to go from kind of being on one side of the hospital bed to the other. And they hospitalized me and I became very, very ill. I gained 70 pounds of fluid. I had a 70 pounds of fluid. I was completely immobilized. I had a retinal hemorrhage that made me blind in my left eye. I can have total sight now, but blind in my left eye. I was so sick that back in November of 2010, the doctors didn't think I would survive, and my family came to say their goodbyes to me, and a priest came in and administered my last rites to me at 25 years old. And no one thought I would make it, but thankfully, right around the time that my last rites were read to me, the diagnosis was finally made, and I was started on chemotherapy, and that's what saved my life. But unfortunately, I would go on to have relapse after relapse after relapse.
So what went on in your head with that the first last rite? Because this was
unfortunately
happened a couple times, but
I was terrified. I mean, I think the most notable memory I have from having my last rites read to me and believing that I wasn't going to survive was that I looked back on my life and I didn't regret anything that I had done or had said. The things that I regretted as I laid in that hospital bed were things that I didn't do or I didn't say. The things I didn't say to my then girlfriend, the experiences that I would never have, like being a father and having a family. That is what really ate at me as I thought I was not going to live any longer. And that has since really inspired a motto or something that I really live by, and that's think it, do it. Because what I realized is that things that I thought about doing and I wanted to do, but I never did because I said, I've got all the time in the world. I'm 25 years old. Those are the things that I regretted. So now if I think it, I try to do it.
So what happened next after that? So you thought you were going to die. Then there was a diagnosis, and what happened next?
So I was diagnosed with idiopathic multicentric Castleman disease, which is a rare immune system disorder where your immune system attacks and shuts down your body's vital organs, your heart, your lungs, your liver, your kidneys. It's a rare disease. About 5,000 patients are diagnosed each year in the U.S., which is about as common as ALS. So it's rare like a disease like ALS, but certainly has much less public awareness. Unfortunately, for my subtype, about a third of us will die within 5 years of diagnosis, and another third die within 10 years of diagnosis. So I got this diagnosis. They started me on chemotherapy, and I became really hopeful that now that we had the diagnosis, maybe this thing would be under control. Unfortunately, I relapsed just a few weeks later and needed another, this time a round of 7 different chemotherapies to get my disease into remission. And thankfully, the combination of 7 chemotherapies did put my disease into remission for a short period of time. And there's even a moment that I can remember was just so special for me, and that was when it was New Year's Eve of 2010. And at this stage, I mentioned I first got sick in August, and now we're about 5 months of being in and out of most of the time in the hospital in critical condition. And the chemo finally kicked in, and I was finally well enough to stand up and go for a walk with my dad. And it was New Year's Eve at about 8 p.m. and we were walking around the hematology oncology floor, and we passed a gentleman. He looked like he'd been drinking on New Year's Eve. He was kind of like swaying in his chair. And on our next lap, we saw he had fallen onto the ground. And so my dad ran over to him and helped him back into his chair. And he looked at my dad and I, and he said, "Thanks so much. Good luck to you and your wife." And we're like, "Wife? What is he talking about?" Then I looked at my belly and I realized he thought it was my dad's pregnant wife. And we just burst into laughter, and we were crying and laughter. I turned to my dad, I said, "Man, you've got an ugly wife." But that was, you would think that would be a low point, but actually it was a high point. I was finally well enough to walk. I was finally well enough to stand up, and I was finally well enough to be confused as a pregnant woman. But that was okay, because I was just happy to be alive. And that really, for me, I think it signaled this kind of change in mentality where I was no longer this, dying patient. I mean, I guess I was still a very sick person, but I was ready to try to find some positivity in the midst of a really tough time.
And so what happened next? Walk us through all the way to like today and finally getting to a place where you went from the hallway of being mistaken for, a very bloated man mistaken for a woman to today, you definitely do not look like a woman. Like, walk us through that process to healing.
Sure. So I went back to medical school after spending about 6 months hospitalized. I spent several months recovering, but went back to med school, and I was on an experimental drug. It's the first drug to ever undergo a randomized controlled trial for my disease. And I was really hopeful that this was going to keep my disease in remission. This was the thing that we'd been hoping and praying for my mom. This was the cure for her that we had hoped for. This is the cure for me that we had hoped for, that we finally had it. And I was back in medical school. And unfortunately, about a year later, I relapsed on that drug. And that was such a difficult experience, not just because I was dying again in the hospital, but the psychological aspect of to realize that the only drug in development is not working for you and that there are no more promising leads. And so I promised my dad and my sister and my girlfriend, Caitlin, that I would dedicate the rest of my life to trying to identify a treatment and maybe a cure for Castleman disease. At this stage, I was a third-year medical student, and obviously it was unlikely that I would actually make progress in time to help myself, but I knew that I could no longer wait and hope for someone else somewhere to do it. And so I got involved in Castleman's research. I began conducting research at UPenn and created a foundation. And about a year later, while getting chemotherapy weekly to try to prevent a relapse, I relapsed again. And thankfully, chemotherapy, the same combination, saved my life. But this time when I got out of the hospital, I knew that there was no way I would make it to Caitlin, my girlfriend, and I's wedding date, which was 5 months in the future, unless I found a drug that could keep me alive. And so I went back to all the samples I'd been storing on myself, blood samples, lymph node samples from that relapse. And I ran a series of experiments on my samples. And from within the data, I found a pattern that made me think that a drug that was developed 30 years ago and had never been used before for Castleman disease might work for me. And based on the data that I generated and the fact that we had literally no other options, I started taking this drug called sirolimus, like I said, approved 30 years ago. And it's now been over 6 years that I've been in remission. And we've started giving this drug to other patients. And so I'm here today because of this drug and because of the support that helped me to find it.
So what's going on mentally when you are put in the position of being the sole person in the world looking for a cure for yourself?
Right.
When there is a hard, in your mind, there's a hard deadline that if I don't meet, I'm not going to be around. Like how did you manage that?
It was really tough. I'm not going to just sugarcoat it and say that it was easy. It was frightening. And being a medical student, I had this like belief that there must be doctors out there and scientists figuring things out, and that no matter what disease I got or someone I loved got, there's progress being made. And it was just really tough to wrap my head around exactly what you're asking. How to go from being this hopeful person to realizing that if I don't do it, no one will. It was really tough, but I do have to say that I was so fortunate. I still am so fortunate to have so many family, friends, people who supported me during this time, because I couldn't have made it through it on my own.
So did you ever, what happens, I think so many people will say, they'll ask the question, of course, and I think part of it's human nature, why me?
Yeah. So I think that I did ask that a bit early on, but going through medical school and seeing all of the people who suffer through so many things and working in a hospital, you sometimes get the sense, why not me? I mean, there's all these amazing people out there who have every reason that they should not get a disease, and they do. And you watch the suffering that they go through. So you almost feel like, I'm no more deserving than anyone else is of my health.
And so do you think being an athlete, do you think that helped you in this process?
I think being an athlete helped in at least two ways. First, I mentioned I gained 70 pounds of fluid the first time I got ill. I also lost 70 pounds of mass from like muscle mass, basically. And so I gained the 70 first, and then lost about over 100 net. And having kind of that muscle mass, it actually probably kept me alive for some of that time when I was so sick and I wasn't able to eat and I was on a feeding tube. So very like literally, I think that all the exercise I've been doing for all those years actually kept me alive. But then also just emotionally, you can remember from your days playing college sports, the challenges that your coaches put you through. I mean, I'm thinking about when one of our team members was late for a morning workout. And in one winter, we all had to go lie on the football field and roll on the field until everyone had basically gotten sick because they were just rolling. You get so dizzy that you just get sick. That was in like 20-degree weather in Washington, D.C. That's the kind of thing that prepares you, I think, in some ways for like being in the ICU and dying and the pain that you go through from fluid accumulation that sometimes I think that sports and training like that can actually prepare you in some ways for it.
And what role do you think faith played?
I think faith played a differing role over time for me. Early on, I spent a lot of time hoping and praying that my disease would turn around, and feeling like that was really the only thing that I could do was hope and pray. And there's a turning point for me, and I actually talk about this a lot in my book, and it's around when I realized that I shouldn't just stop at hoping and praying. I realized that if I'm hoping for it and if I'm praying for it, that should actually drive my action. I kind of had this previous belief that with faith, you pray for it and then you just believe. And there's a quote that my mom used to keep in her purse that I found after she passed away. It's from Pope John Paul, and it's about being invincible in hope. And I really always had this thought that, like, if you can be hopeful and you can just believe that it'll happen. And then I found the rest of that quote, and Pope John Paul went on to say that if you were in a position to be able to take action, you have a responsibility to take action. You shouldn't just wait, hope, and pray, or pray, hope, and wait. Pray, hope, and take action. And so for me, I've really moved into this kind of action mode.
And so you said you believe in the power of science and medicine. What else do you believe in now?
I think that science, medicine, and I think the power of people to support one another, whether that's because there's some sort of deity, God that's creating order in the universe. I don't know, but what I do know is that the people on this planet, the people in my life, have been so supportive and helpful to me in ways that I don't think I ever could have imagined. And so whether it's that they were put here to do that to help, I don't know, but I just know that the people in my family and loved ones have just been amazing.
In terms of, so you almost died numerous times.
5 times, yeah.
5 times. Was that, by the times you got from, to the fourth and fifth time, like how did like, what was going on in your head? Was there ever a point where you said, you know what, if I'm ready, I'm ready? How much did that cross your mind, or was it fighting this the whole time? Like, what was each, I think I'm so curious about this because I'm going to make a bet that most people listening have not had a near-death experience. And so if you were drilled, like, did that experience change? Was each experience similar or different, and how so?
They were really quite different. I think that the first thing I would say is that when I was dying for the first time, if someone had told me at that stage, you're going to survive this, but then it's going to come back again and again and again. And you're going to spend together, all together, many months on the verge, and you're going to suffer. And if someone had told me what I was going to endure, I don't know if I would have had the mental strength to fight for that day. And I know it's a cliche, but because I literally was just fighting for that day and I didn't know what was in my future, I could do that. I can be like, I can fight today. I'm going to fight to breathe. I'm going to fight to survive today. And so that was kind of how it was early on. And then what I didn't mention about Caitlin, so my now wife, we ended up making it to our wedding day, got married. What I didn't mention is that just before I got sick, we actually had just broken up. We've been dating for over 2 years, and we just broken up before I became ill. And one of the reasons we broke up was, or one of the reasons that we felt okay breaking up was that we said, well, we're 25 years old. We've got all the time in the world. If it's meant to be, it'll work out. And then there I was, just a few months later dying. And we both realized we wanted to get back together, but I kept pushing her away. She would come to try to see me in the hospital, and I didn't want her to see me like that. But we eventually got back together after all those months. Actually, the picture of me with that huge belly looking so well, that was when she came to see me for the first time, and somehow still, wanted to get back together. But once we got back together, it became a different sort of fight for me. It wasn't just, me fighting for myself. It was, I want to survive so I can get engaged to this person, so I can get married to this person. And then more recently to have a family with this person. We actually have a daughter. She's 18 months old, and we never thought that we would be able to, to see this day.
So for anyone listening who, maybe is suffering, there's something going on, probably not to the extent where, they think they're going to die, but whether it's, mild autoimmune or just things are off, what advice do you have to those people, especially as it sounds like there's a process, whether it's, anger, sadness, like walk us through sort of like that mental process, and what have you learned about how you handle that, and advice you have for people struggling out there?
I think for me, and everyone's going to handle things differently, but for me, the thing that helped me handle it emotionally the most, or the first step, was to figure out who is the expert that I need to go see. If you have a rare disease, it's really critical you find someone who really is experienced. So knowing that I was going to see the best person actually put my mind somewhat at ease, saying, okay, well, at least I'm going to go see the best person.
But then you discovered they didn't have an answer for you.
Exactly. Then I discovered that the world's expert only knows however much the world knows. And if the world doesn't know, then the world's expert doesn't know. So, but for many diseases, going to the world's expert is really critical. And I think that is important. I think that leaning on the people in your life that you love is so important. When I was watching my mom battle cancer, I had some kind of preconceived notions about how I should support her or be there for her. I thought that I always had to be positive, and I thought that we shouldn't ever talk about the really tough things, because I thought that she wouldn't want to, I didn't want to burden her with those sort of things. And then when I was the sick patient, and now that I am the sick patient, I've learned just how important it is to actually just be like totally authentic with the people that you love about these really tough things. I mean, if it's, if it's important enough for you as a loved one or for you as a patient to think about, I think it's so important to share those feelings with the people that you love.
On the science piece, you touched on this a little bit. You talk about in the book the Santa Claus theory of civilization. And in your opinion, is it just like Castleman's, okay, very rare? What else is out there? And just how has your view changed on the scientific community and all the scary things that are out there that maybe we don't even know about?
Yeah. So the Santa Claus theory of civilization is really this concept that, and I'm was so guilty of feeling this way, that of course, for every disease, for every major problem, there must be people out there that are working together. There's a workshop of elves figuring out solutions for diseases. I mean, there must be, right? And I think that Google kind of like reinforces this concept, because I feel like any question you could ever think of, you start typing it in and then Google finishes your question. You're like, oh, wow, I'm not the only person that thought that. And so then you have this sense that like everyone's thought about everything and everything's being worked on or has been worked on. And then you realize and you learn that for a lot of problems, especially medical problems, there actually are not solutions. And in fact, this week is Rare Disease Week. And the reason it's Rare Disease Week is because February 29th is the rarest day of the year, and February 29th is Rare Disease Day. And what we're trying to raise awareness around Rare Disease Day is that there are 7,000 rare diseases that affect 30 million Americans. So 1 in 10 Americans has a rare disease, and 95% of them don't have a treatment. And wow. So, I mean, that's like mind blowing, right? And when you're even when you're in medical school and in healthcare, you don't learn or realize, you don't learn about all the diseases where there aren't solutions. You learn about the diseases where there are solutions. And I think we really need to change that.
Jason Wachob here, founder and co-CEO of mindbodygreen and the host of the mindbodygreen podcast. Please subscribe. You'll never miss a show and you won't regret it. So what did you learn about, like, let's walk through Castleman's at the moment and like, what is it? What did the world know about it a couple of years ago? And then thanks to you and your work, what do we know about it today?
Sure. So Castleman's at its heart is an immune system disorder where your immune system, which is supposed to be protecting you, also your immune system also protects you against cancer. If it detects cancer, it will actually kill and eliminate cancer occasionally. So, this thing that's supposed to be protecting you in Castleman disease for an unknown reason begins to attack you. So the thing that's supposed to be defending goes on the attack and it goes after your vital organs. And unfortunately, when I was diagnosed, the disease was considered to be really more like a lymphoma, so a cancer of the lymph nodes. And so it was treated only with chemotherapy because that's how you treat these sort of diseases. But the reality is that even back then, we didn't know whether it should be called a lymphoma, a cancer, or if it should be called an autoimmune condition. And that's not really a fault of the medical community, because actually it has features of both. It's kind of cancer-like and also autoimmune-like. So it's a complicated disease, but the community really was putting it more in the cancer bucket and treating it with chemo.
Right.
And chemo is important. It saved my life 7 times, but the research and the real changes that we've made into understanding what's going on. I run a lab at UPenn that's focused on studying this. I run a foundation that's focused on driving forward research internationally. And what we've learned is that, yes, it's cancer-like, but the autoimmune features are really critical. And there are drugs that can target the autoimmune aspects of the disease. So drugs that are already approved for autoimmune conditions. And actually, in my case, the drug I'm on was developed for kidney transplantation 30 years ago. Because if you get a kidney transplant, your immune system attacks your kidney. And the way that this drug works is to suppress your immune system. And so if I'd gone to a doctor when I first got sick and said, I want to try this drug, they would have said, you're crazy. You're going to treat something like cancer with an immunosuppressant. Right. But the research that we did, and really just getting away from following dogma and following just the way things are done and saying, well, where's the data? Let's generate the data. That's how we got to where we are today. And we now have opened up a clinical trial where we give this drug to other patients. Unfortunately, it's only worked thus far in about 1/3 of patients that have gotten the drug I'm on. So it's not the solution for everyone. And, we're continuing to work for new drugs for other patients.
It's just mind blowing to me that there was a drug drug that been around for 30 years. It makes me think, what else is out there that for some reason or another we're not utilizing, we're not thinking about, is sitting on a shelf in the back of a lab somewhere? And also, I watched something recently on TV, like the hunt for what is the new drug. And what I didn't realize is it makes sense. Like, so many drugs come from botanicals in certain parts of the world, and finding that, rare mushroom or plant in Thailand, which is potentially the next great drug that could help save lives, and what's happening there. And so, wow.
It's, what you said, that's what keeps me up at night. So obviously I focus so much on Castleman disease, but I think the thing that really keeps me up at night is this question of how many drugs are already out there that are literally at your neighborhood pharmacy sitting there that could be a treatment or cure for a patient that has a deadly disease and just no one even knows about it. And so the real challenge is how to create a system so that all of these drugs that are already approved actually get studied and tested in other indications. And it's really hard to do that. There really are not very many financial incentives in place to get, because it takes a lot of time and effort and money to do this kind of research. And we have to figure out a way, because just as you said, it's crazy to think like the drug I'm on literally was at my neighborhood pharmacy and no one had ever thought to try it. And then we started it, and now here I'm alive 6 years later. So I think that's a huge issue. It's something we call drug repurposing, taking a drug developed for one indication and trying it for another.
Totally different application, but metformin, which people use for diabetes in our world, and the biohackers who are pursuing longevity, a lot of them are experimenting with metformin and measuring their biological age. So like a way different application, and metformin is derived, I think, from like French lilac. Mm-hmm. So it's like, would you ever imagine this diabetes, like people are using to...
It's amazing. And actually the drug I'm on, so sirolimus, is also called rapamycin. And this is another drug that people are using at very low doses for this concept of, anti-aging and longevity. And actually the cool thing about rapamycin, you mentioned the concept of how so many of these drugs do come from naturally occurring products. This drug rapamycin was first discovered on the island of Rapa Nui. Easter Island is the other name for Rapa Nui. A drug company was looking in the dirt of this Easter Island for potential drugs, and they found this molecule in the dirt. And now here I am alive 50 years later because of some scientists went digging in dirt on Easter Island.
Yeah, most people, and it was a surprise to me. Like I didn't really give much thought about it, but I never thought that so many of these life-saving drugs were born in the dirt of an island or in a jungle. I would tend to think like, okay, there's like a chemist in a lab with a coat. They're not derived from the earth or botanicals or just the so.
Yeah, a lot, and even the ones that are synthetically made in labs, a lot of times they're inspired by naturally occurring products. And so you find out that this one thing works and does this sort of thing, and then you say, I'm going to synthesize it and then I'm going to tweak it and make it even better.
So people like Bill Gates have publicly said what's most concerning to them is, the super bug we don't know about. Where my head is at is, okay, you've got the let's call it like the big ones. You've got cancer, you've got heart disease. Obviously, huge issues, and a lot of people are working. Heart disease, I think we're all understanding. There's a lot with regards to lifestyle that we can do. Cancer, a little bit like, it's. Cancer is obviously a huge issue and affects so many families, my family, your family. But then you've got like this long tail, if you will, of whether it's the superbug or the virus that came out of nowhere, coronavirus. And what I kind of think, I'm still an optimist. I'm optimistic, is we're entering a world where whether it's coronavirus or Castleman's or there's probably going to be a long tail of all these things that we don't know what the hell is going on. And that's potentially going to be a big problem.
Yeah.
Because then you have, in some ways, you're alluding like where the money is, the opportunity, that's where resources go. But if we enter a world where it's, okay, we've got maybe, I'd like to think we're getting to a place where cancer, we're figuring things out. But then we've got a long tail of like 50 other things that resources should just spread everywhere, and that we're going to enter a world where we need 1,000 guys like you, hopefully not going through the torture you went through to figure things out and what's your take on where the world is going with this?
It is crazy, and what you're alluding to, I think, is also the fact that, we're generating more data than ever before. So we have the possibility to learn more about this long tail of diseases than ever before, but we're not necessarily harnessing all those data in the way that we could. And so I think that, and I mentioned earlier this concept of drug repurposing. I'm really optimistic about this because basically these new tools of genetic sequencing and things called proteomics and transcriptomics, ways to kind of profile human disease in ways that we've never been able to do before, those tools are available. And so what I'm really optimistic about is to use those tools to understand what's going on in people's individual diseases. How does this disease work? And then not just trying to develop new drugs, which is the primary path is you figure out what's going on, you develop a new drug. But what I really push for is let's figure out what's going on. Then let's look in our rearview mirror and look at all the drugs that already exist. And ask the question, if based on what I'm figuring out here in the lab that I see in this disease, could one of those old drugs potentially work? Because those old drugs are often generic and they're much cheaper than these new drugs that are being developed. And so it's good for the healthcare system for us to repurpose drugs. And it's really good for patients because if it's an old drug, then that means that that it got approved by the FDA for something and that it was safe enough to cross their thresholds, as opposed to new drug development, which is going to have a lot more risk.
So do you think that the number of these unsolved cases or medical mysteries, do you think the number is increasing, or do you think they were just misdiagnosed 20, 30 years ago?
I think that they were misdiagnosed, and for many of these diseases, we didn't even have a name for what the disease was 20 or 30 years ago. So, patients and individuals, they would suffer from their disease. No name was put on it, and no treatment was given. Now, with these new technologies I was mentioning, you can put a name on the disease quite easily. You can say this disease is caused by this genetic mutation, but unfortunately, for most diseases, I mentioned 95% of rare diseases, that's where it ends. We can put a name on it. We know what you're going to go through because we know how other patients have dealt with your illness, but we don't have a drug for you. And for many of these rare diseases, there are a lot of drugs in development. There's things coming down the pipeline, but we have to figure out ways to speed it up.
What role do you think, whether it's environment, lifestyle, nutrition, all those factors, like what role do you think that's playing in some of these unsolved crazy things you're seeing?
Yeah, so for the super rare conditions that we're seeing, many and most of them are purely genetic, where there's a single change out of 6 billion base pairs in your genome, just one single incorrect base pair, and all of a sudden you have this awful condition. And so for the very, very rare conditions, it's almost always like that. For the not as rare conditions that affect larger numbers, it's very complicated. So it's this kind of complex interplay. As you mentioned, cancer is a great example where there's a complex interplay of some genetic background, but really your lifestyle, your exposures, what you eat, how much you exercise. I personally, as we mentioned earlier, used to exercise all the time and eat really well.
You're the picture of health.
That's right.
And literally, it was the picture. If you were going to do a picture of health, we could show the picture. Like you were the picture of health.
And then I got really, really sick, and I despite, eating perfectly and exercising all the time. And I had this kind of pendulum swing where I went I haven't had a hamburger in 10 years because I've been eating so healthy. And this is where it got me, right? And so all of a sudden the pendulum swung way too far where I was like, all I'm going to do is eat hamburgers.
Right.
And then now that I'm doing well and I'm thinking about the future, now it's okay. I can't just eat hamburgers all the time. I need to actually do things that are good for my health as well.
Well, I think it's an important perspective. We talk to a lot of functional medicine doctors, and what they'll say is your genes, not your destiny. You can do things that turn genes on and off.
Absolutely.
And look, on one hand, that's very empowering. Like, okay, this thing runs in my family. I know what it is. I'm going to make adjustments. That legacy stopped with my, father or mother, and a new day with me. And that's empowering, having that information. On the other hand, I think sometimes there's there is pressure when, someone is the picture of health and something happens, can quickly become, why me? What did I do wrong?
Yeah.
There'll be sometimes stigma. Well, that person was in our world, in the hardcore world of alternative health, if you will. Well, maybe they were, very stressed, or they were angry, or, they were having too much sugar and everything. It was a lifestyle choice. And then there's some like preconceived notions, maybe some shame, some guilt. But I think it's an important note that sometimes shit happens.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point. I think that it's so critical to utilize all of the data from functional medicine and how to prevent disease. But I think it's important it stops when disease happens, that you don't, as you said, feel guilty, or that you don't think that you did something wrong, or your job or your family, someone caused this disease. I think that's really important.
And sometimes it's powerful just to say, put it in the I don't know drawer. Well, because I'm sure part of you is like, why this? What was it? I'm guessing the scientist in you is trying to, well, maybe it was this over here or that over there. And sometimes you put it away in the I don't know drawer and says, you know what? I don't know. I'm going to be okay with that, but I'm going to move on. And
that's right.
And I think that's hard.
It's really hard. And I think that, something that I know you talked about, and why you started mindbodygreen, is because you wanted to kind of pull all these things together. It's not, as I've heard you say before, it's not 3 words, it's 1 word. You're bringing together these 3 things. And I think that having that sort of clarity about how all of these aspects of your life work together, and how nothing happens on its own. I think that can sometimes help you to say, it's complicated. I don't know what piece of, mindbodygreen it is, but these are all together, and it's hard to separate one versus the other. And so I'm just going to say, I don't know how this fits in.
So how has your perspective changed? Fast forward to today, you're married, you have a beautiful child. Like, how has your perspective changed on life? What's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning?
So the first thing that I do when I wake up is I look at the monitor next to my bed, and I see if Amelia's awake, my 18-month-old daughter. If she is, I run down and I grab her and I bring her up into bed, and she sits with us for a couple minutes. I wish it was longer, but it's only a few minutes, but it's a really precious few minutes where we just spend time together, and that helps to kind of set my day. It's like with Amelia, with Caitlin, and then I start rushing to get ready for the day. But before I leave the door, another really important thing is that I take 3 pills, this drug, sirolimus, from the island of Rapa Nui.
Are you going to visit?
I want to go to Easter Island so bad. I want to dig in the soil. I want to get in there.
We got a sandbox in our house filled with the sand.
Yeah, I want to get there so bad one day. But so my morning is seeing Amelia. It's taking my medication. It's getting ready to go and spend a day continuing to fight Castleman disease. I mean, right now I'm not physically battling, and I'm not in the hospital, but I spend my days fighting this disease in the lab, and fighting this disease, analyzing data and trying to figure out what's going on. I think probably one overarching theme about how I am different today than when I first got sick, it's an analogy that I think will resonate with you as a basketball player, and that's the concept of overtime. And so in overtime, every second counts, and there's this, at least for me, there's this intense focus that you get in clarity in overtime. At least in college football overtime, there's no clock, and so it's basically all focus on every play, and it's full clarity on what the purpose is. You can make a mistake in the first quarter of a football game. You can throw an interception and you can make up for it. But in overtime, you can't make a mistake. Every second counts. Every action, it needs to be intentional. And you'd think that would create maybe anxiety or fear. But I think it's actually calming, because it's this is what's important to me. And for me, what's important to me is my family and my research. And so, I live with this concept of overtime. I mean, I had my last rites read to me in November of 2010, and I've considered that the start of my overtime. So now I'm in my 5th overtime. And in overtime, I have this real clarity that, my family, the people that I love, and the work that I love. And that helps me to just really stay focused.
So every day you wake up grateful, I'm assuming.
So grateful and honestly surprised that I'm waking up and I feel my port that I have below the skin, that I get chemo infused into, and it reminds me, like, I got to keep working because there's a lot of other patients out there who are just waiting for us.
So last question, the power of humor.
So you would think that in the midst of really, really tough times, that humor would maybe be like the last thing that you would be thinking about. And, who wants to, who would be laughing when they're going through really tough times? But I've actually found that humor is so, so important during really, really tough times. I shared earlier about when my dad and I went for that walk, and I was confused as my dad's pregnant wife. But that was just, I think I learned to laugh in that case actually from my mom and from a number of experiences when she was going through her own illness. I remember when she had the first brain surgery to treat her disease, and we were so worried about if we would still have my mom after the surgery, would she still be the same person? And I remember when they pulled back the curtain, my mom was sitting up, and she had bandages all over her head, and she had a bulb basically coming out of her head, and we were just so scared, didn't know what to say. And she looked at us and she pointed to her head and she said, "Chiquita Banana Lady." And we just burst into laughter. And like, that is what we needed. We needed her. We were so afraid. We didn't know what we were going to see or what was going to happen, but we needed that sort of just lightheartedness connection, because laughing is so important, but more so than just laughing on your own, watching a YouTube video, laughing with the people that you love, I think creates a connection that's hard to describe. My dad and I have had that connection, my sisters, my wife, finding ways to connect with people around something that you laugh about. I don't think anything can beat that.
So in addition to humor, what are the other, if you had to summarize the life lessons you carry with you today, what are some of the others?
Yeah. So as I've said earlier, you learn a lot about life from almost dying. And so humor is certainly one of those lessons in the midst of really tough times. Another is the concept of overtime, that, I felt like I'm in overtime, but I've also learned that actually we're all in overtime, and we all should be living with the kind of mindfulness and clarity of purpose that I think comes with being in overtime. Another is around turning hope into action. I talked about earlier how you can be hopeful and take action. Don't just hope, but turn your hope into action. Another one is that sometimes solutions can be hiding in plain sight. You may think that there's some complex, challenging solution. So in my case, what might be treating, what drug should I take? Maybe we have to develop a new drug and spend 10 years, but actually this drug was just sitting at my neighborhood pharmacy. And another lesson that I live with and that I talk about a lot in Chasing My Cure is this concept that if it was just me working on my own, we would have made no progress, and I wouldn't be here today. I literally wouldn't be sitting here. But because I've had this amazing team, I call them our army, our Castleman warrior army, because of this team, we have made so much progress in the fight against Castleman disease. So it shouldn't be chasing my cure, it should be chasing our cure, because there have been so many people that have been a part of this. And I think that all too well, I know you've got a great partner in crime and your wife here with mindbodygreen, but it's so important to fight with people.
Amen. I wish everyone listening had your mindset.
Thank you.
Well, we're glad you're here. Congrats on everything you're doing. And I'm glad you're here spreading the word.
Thank you so much for having me. When you go through really, really tough times, there's a quote from Robin Roberts, to make your mess your message. And that's really what I'm trying to do. I wish I hadn't gone through all of that stuff. I mean, I really wish that I hadn't gone through all this. I wish my family didn't go through this. But if you are going to go through these sort of things, you do learn a lot about life and a lot about living from nearly dying. And so that's why I'm trying to spread the word about these lessons about life through Chasing My Cure, through getting on podcasts like this with you to be able to talk to people about these really critical life lessons over time, hope, making the most of the time that you have, turning hope into action. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, David. Thanks, guys.